"Watch this, Mom. Your steak is on the ground now," Ethan said, tossing the perfectly cooked piece of meat onto the concrete with a smirk as the smoke from the grill curled lazily in the late afternoon sun. Margaret froze, her hands clutching the tongs as the sizzle faded, the smell of charred seasoning filling her senses. She blinked, letting the moment stretch, not responding, not even flinching, though her chest tightened and her fingers itched to react. The backyard was alive with the hum of cicadas and the faint laughter of guests oblivious to the tension, and for a brief second, the laughter seemed to echo at the wrong pitch, jarring against her carefully maintained composure. Margaret slowly set the tongs down, letting the heat of the summer afternoon wash over her, feeling the weight of 38 years of dinners, holidays, and family gatherings pressing silently into the folds of her memory. She adjusted her apron, brushing a stray strand of silver hair behind her ear, and stepped back, observing the small crowd at the barbecue, noting the way people whispered behind raised glasses and forked salads. The smell of grilled corn and burgers mingled with the faint scent of flowers from the garden, but Margaret only noticed the sudden, sharp sting of humiliation. She remembered past Sundays, when Ethan, once a small boy with chubby cheeks and a wide-eyed curiosity, would sit beside her and praise her cooking with an eager, unfiltered honesty. Now, standing there with that smirk and a casual cruelty that had taken years to cultivate, he seemed a stranger, a child she had helped shape, who now wielded mockery as if it were a blade. Margaret's eyes scanned the patio, catching the flicker of an aunt's raised eyebrow and the tentative glance of a neighbor who had known her for decades, subtle signals that something was amiss, that the social rhythm had shifted without her noticing. She inhaled slowly, tasting the faint tang of smoke on her lips, and the moment stretched into a quiet understanding. This was not a mistake, nor a lapse in judgment. It was a statement, carefully placed and deliberate. Margaret did not speak. She did not scold. She simply allowed the seconds to pass, noting the absurdity and the cruelty woven into a single, small gesture. Her mind drifted briefly to the preparation that morning, the marinated steaks, the carefully seasoned vegetables, the crisp white linens, the sparkling silverware, all laid out with the precision of someone who loved to nurture, who had believed in the warmth of family gatherings as the glue holding everyone together. Now the steak lay on the ground, a tangible symbol of disregard, of a line crossed that she had not anticipated but had felt forming over years of subtle slights and dismissed efforts. Margaret's gaze softened, not from weakness but from the cold calculation that had begun to take root in her, understanding that the power she had invested in family rituals was not lost but simply unacknowledged. She stepped to the side, retrieving a plate from the table, lifting the fallen steak with an almost imperceptible shake of her head, and carried it back into the kitchen, the click of her heels on the concrete echoing faintly. There was no outburst, no words, only a series of controlled movements, each deliberate, each measured, carrying with them the weight of restraint and the quiet intensity of a mind taking note, cataloging each slight, each infraction, each microaggression that would later inform her strategy. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the yard, and Margaret felt a strange mix of warmth and tension as she laid the steak on the counter, its surface marred but still intact, a symbol of both what was taken and what remained. She breathed out slowly, letting the hot air drift past her, and the faint rustle of leaves in the nearby maple tree seemed to whisper reminders of patience, observation, and the quiet power that comes from choosing when to act and when to remain still. Margaret stepped back from the kitchen counter, setting the plate down with careful precision, feeling the weight of the moment settle like a heavy curtain over the room. The smell of grilled vegetables mingled with the faint scent of rosemary and thyme that had lingered from the afternoon, yet none of it softened the sharp edge of tension that had woven itself through the air. She could hear Ethan moving around outside, the clatter of dishes, the occasional laugh that seemed forced, as if rehearsed, echoing through the sliding glass doors. Margaret wiped her hands on a clean towel, her movements deliberate, each one a silent assertion of composure, and she allowed herself a slow, measured glance around the kitchen, noting the subtle disarray left behind by the bustle of preparation. A cutting board with streaks of olive oil, a half-empty bottle of barbecue sauce, a skillet still warm from the coals. She paused for a moment, eyes resting on the small herb garden outside the window, and felt the contrast between the calm of the greenery and the unsettled air inside. Her mind wandered briefly to past Sundays when the backyard had been filled with chatter, the smell of food, the easy laughter of children running across the lawn, the simple joy of family togetherness that she had once taken for granted. Now, every familiar detail felt tinged with the unexpected, the clink of silverware, the hum of conversation. Even the sunlight reflecting off the patio furniture seemed to carry a subtle reminder that something had shifted irrevocably. Margaret moved to the sink and filled a glass with water, the cool liquid a small comfort against the heat of her awareness, and she sipped slowly, savoring the clarity it brought to her thoughts. She reflected on the small patterns of behavior she had observed over the past several months. A dismissive glance, a casual remark, a joke that was meant to sting but had been veiled in laughter. These minor instances had seemed isolated at the time, easily dismissed as a momentary lapse or the playfulness of youth. Yet now, in the context of today, they revealed themselves as threads in a larger tapestry of subtle disregard. Margaret set the glass down and ran a hand over the counter, feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingers, grounding herself, reminding herself of the careful control she had always exercised over her environment and, by extension, her emotions. Outside, Ethan's voice rose for a moment, calling someone by name, and Margaret allowed herself a quiet acknowledgement of the sound without allowing it to provoke a reaction. She busied herself with clearing the table, stacking plates with precision, wiping down surfaces, letting each motion serve as both a distraction and a statement of self-possession. The sky above the backyard shifted, the late afternoon sun dipping toward the horizon, casting a warm glow across the lawn and highlighting the small imperfections of the day that had passed unnoticed in the rush of social interaction. Margaret paused again, taking in the sight, feeling a subtle surge of awareness that this moment, this seemingly ordinary household scene, was layered with meaning, a reminder of relationships tested, of unspoken judgments, of the quiet endurance that had become her companion. She arranged the remaining food carefully, aligning serving dishes with meticulous attention, her mind cataloging each detail, each expression she had observed, each tone of voice, storing them as quiet reference points for understanding and, if necessary, response. The gentle breeze drifted through the open window, carrying with it the faint scent of the neighborhood, the distant sound of children playing, a bird calling from the nearby oak. Margaret felt a sense of equilibrium returning, not through confrontation, not through words, but through the deliberate cultivation of her own calm, a quiet center amidst the subtle chaos. She straightened her posture, shoulders back, head held high, and allowed herself a measured exhale, the kind that releases tension without revealing the depth of awareness within. Every movement, every choice to remain composed, reinforced her internal narrative of dignity, resilience, and quiet strength. Margaret understood that patience, observation, and restraint were not signs of passivity, but instruments of power, tools that would serve her in navigating the unfolding dynamics, that would ensure she remained unshaken, clear-headed, and ready to respond with precision when the time arrived. The day continued to drift toward evening, light fading gently, shadows lengthening across the kitchen floor, and Margaret moved with purpose, cleaning, arranging, noting, and preparing herself mentally for the next encounter, her mind sharp, her awareness acute, every small act a testament to the discipline and quiet authority that had guided her life, and would continue to do so. Margaret carried the dishes back into the kitchen, setting them carefully on the counter, each plate aligned as if on display, a quiet testament to her meticulous nature and the care she had invested in her family over the years. She moved deliberately, noticing the sunlight slipping through the blinds, casting long, narrow rectangles of warmth across the floor, and she allowed herself a slow breath, steadying her thoughts. Outside, the backyard had fallen into a softer glow, the laughter and chatter of guests dimming as people began to gather their things, leaving small traces of their presence behind. A napkin left near the grill, a fork resting on a plate, a glass with remnants of iced tea. Margaret observed these details with a calm awareness, cataloging them without judgment, understanding that they were part of the rhythm of life she had always maintained with such care. Her eyes drifted to the empty chair at the table where she had once sat with Ethan as a boy, imagining the innocence and eagerness he had displayed, the way he had once looked to her for approval, for guidance, for warmth. She thought of the small moments that had built the foundation of their relationship, teaching him to ride a bike, helping with school projects, the quiet Sunday afternoons spent baking and laughing in the kitchen. Those memories now contrasted sharply with the sharp edge of the present, the subtle disregard she had felt, the casual cruelty masked as humor. Margaret ran a hand over the counter, feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingers, grounding herself in the tactile reality of the kitchen, a space she had always controlled, a space where she could assert calm and order even when emotions threatened to ripple outward. She poured herself a cup of water and sipped slowly, allowing the cool liquid to center her, letting the rhythm of her breath and the quiet ticking of the wall clock guide her through the tension of the afternoon. Her gaze wandered briefly to the herb garden outside the window, noting the slight rustle of leaves, the faint scent of basil and mint carried in by the breeze, a reminder of life and growth continuing even amidst moments of discomfort and tension. Margaret reflected on the subtle cues she had observed in Ethan over the past months, the jokes that were slightly sharper than intended, the comments that seemed dismissive, the way he had avoided certain conversations or deflected attention in moments where respect should have been evident. Each instance, small and seemingly innocuous at the time, had accumulated into a pattern that now revealed itself in its full impact. She straightened her posture, shoulders back, head held high, feeling the quiet power of self-possession and awareness. Every movement she made, from arranging the dishes to wiping down the counter, was deliberate, a manifestation of the patience and discipline that had long guided her actions. Margaret allowed herself a brief moment to acknowledge the sting of the afternoon, recognizing it without letting it define her, understanding that the path forward was not one of immediate confrontation but of careful observation, of noting patterns, of preparing for measured, thoughtful response. The sky shifted outside, clouds tinged with the pink and orange of the setting sun, casting a gentle glow through the blinds, and Margaret took this in with a steady gaze, absorbing the calm, the quiet, the subtle reassurance that she could carry through the challenges ahead. She returned to the counter, organizing the utensils, wiping down surfaces, and letting her mind catalog everything she had observed. The expressions, the tones, the small gestures that revealed intentions, all forming a quiet map of understanding that she would navigate with precision when the time came. Every action she took was a testament to control, to dignity, to the quiet authority of someone who had long learned the power of patience and reflection, a woman fully aware of her strength even when it remained unseen by others. Margaret straightened the last plate, taking a moment to feel the smooth surface beneath her fingertips, and allowed a deep, measured breath to settle the day's tension, reinforcing the sense of calm and clarity that would guide her through the unfolding evening and the quiet strategies she was already planning. Margaret moved to the living room, her hands lingering on the armrest of the sofa, feeling the smooth fabric beneath her fingers as a sense of reflection settled over her. The evening light filtered through the curtains, casting warm streaks across the carpet, highlighting the subtle dust motes that danced slowly in the air. She sank into the seat, her posture straight yet relaxed, taking in the familiar surroundings of a home that had witnessed decades of family life, celebrations, and quiet moments alike. Each piece of furniture, each photograph on the wall, spoke to a history she had nurtured and preserved, moments of care that now contrasted sharply with the subtle tension lingering from the afternoon. Margaret allowed her mind to wander, revisiting memories of Sunday barbecues past, where laughter had flowed freely, where Ethan had once approached her with a wide-eyed excitement for the day, eager to share in small joys that she had meticulously prepared. Those days had been marked by warmth, simplicity, and connection, and the shift she had observed over the past year now brought a quiet ache that she acknowledged without dramatics, absorbing it into her awareness. She reached for a cup of tea on the side table, the porcelain cool to the touch, and held it in both hands, feeling the weight and the reassurance it offered, a small ritual of grounding amidst subtle upheaval. Outside, The sounds of evening settled over the neighborhood. The hum of distant traffic, the occasional bark of a dog, and the soft rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze provided a backdrop to her thoughts, a quiet counterpoint to the shifting dynamics inside. Margaret reflected on the gradual changes in Ethan, noticing small moments that had previously been brushed off as typical behavior but now seemed like pieces of a larger pattern. Fleeting impatience, subtle dismissiveness, carefully placed jokes that undercut her authority, and an overall sense of entitlement that had crept in over time. These realizations layered together, forming a clear picture in her mind, each observation catalogued and stored for later consideration. She sipped her tea slowly, savoring the warmth and the focus it brought, letting the quiet settle and her mind sharpen, aware of the subtleties of human behavior that often went unnoticed but now seemed amplified in the context of recent events. Margaret allowed herself to think through her approach, considering measured responses and the subtle ways in which she could assert dignity and control without confrontation, understanding that power often resided in observation, in the calm patience that allowed one to act with clarity and precision. She traced her fingers along the edge of the coffee table, feeling the cool wood beneath her touch, noting the faint scratches and marks that told stories of family life, evidence of a shared history that had been carefully curated and tended. Each imperfection became a reminder of endurance, of moments weathered and preserved, of the resilience that had guided her through both ordinary and challenging times. As she sat quietly, the evening deepened and the ambient light softened, casting gentle shadows across the room that moved slowly with the fading sun. Margaret focused on her breath, the rhythm steady and grounding, allowing the quiet to fill her with a sense of centeredness and resolve. She considered the dynamics at play, the subtle undercurrents of interaction that had shaped the afternoon, and the ways in which her composed presence had already begun to influence the energy of the household. Every detail registered. The positions of chairs, the half-finished drinks on the patio, the careful arrangement of utensils, the lingering warmth of grilled food. These were not merely objects. They were markers of attention, care, and the silent assertion of presence, a testament to the ways in which Margaret navigated her environment with awareness and dignity. She exhaled slowly, letting the air flow through her lungs, feeling a quiet satisfaction in the clarity and control she had cultivated, aware that the evening, while challenging, had been managed with precision and calm. Margaret remained seated, poised and observant, fully aware of the power of quiet strength, ready to carry forward the insights of the day into the next moments with deliberate care, ensuring that her presence would continue to command attention, respect, and thoughtful engagement. Margaret rose from the living room sofa, leaving the fading sunlight behind, and moved toward the hallway that led to her study, a space she had maintained as a sanctuary of order and reflection. The soft hum of the ceiling fan filled the room with a gentle rhythm, a backdrop to the quiet contemplation that had settled over her since the barbecue. She paused at the doorway, noticing the light filtering through the blinds, casting narrow stripes across the polished wooden floor, highlighting the subtle imperfections that told stories of decades of family life, moments of joy, small accidents, and careful restorations alike. Margaret stepped into the study and closed the door softly behind her, the click resonating in the stillness, a deliberate assertion of personal space and calm. She allowed her eyes to wander across the room, taking in the neat stacks of books, the carefully arranged papers on the desk, the framed photographs capturing birthdays, holidays, and quiet afternoons that had once been filled with laughter and connection. Each image and object carried a weight of memory, a record of a life lived with intention and care, a life that had shaped the family dynamics she now navigated with increased awareness. Margaret sat at her desk, fingertips grazing the surface as she allowed herself a slow breath, centering in the stillness of the moment. She reflected on the subtleties of the interactions earlier, on the way Ethan had carried himself, his casual disregard for her effort, the smirk that had punctuated his words, and she catalogued each detail with careful attention. The faint scent of the barbecue lingered in the air, a reminder of the world outside, but inside the study, Margaret felt a sense of quiet control, a space where observation and strategy could take precedence over reaction. She reached for a notebook and pen, not out of impulsive desire to record grievances, but as a methodical way to track patterns, to ensure that no detail was lost to the passage of time, that each moment could be assessed with clarity and without emotional clouding. Her mind cataloged the small behaviors, the jokes, the subtle dismissals, the uneven glances, each a piece in the puzzle of understanding the evolving family dynamics. Margaret allowed herself a small smile, not of satisfaction at offense taken, but of recognition of her own power and composure, the strength that came from patience, from watching, from understanding the interplay of intentions without being drawn into immediate conflict. She sipped from a cup of tea she had brought into the study, the warmth a quiet comfort, a rhythm to her reflection that steadied her breathing and sharpened her awareness. Outside, the neighborhood had grown quieter as evening deepened, the distant sounds of a dog barking and the faint hum of traffic merging with the soft rustle of leaves in the trees. Inside, Margaret focused on the subtle interplay of energy she had sensed throughout the day, the way small gestures could carry more meaning than words, the way her own responses, or lack thereof, set the tone for the household, quietly asserting boundaries and presence. She arranged her notes, setting pens parallel to the edge of the desk, aligning papers, creating a space that reflected both her inner order and the strategic clarity she intended to bring to future interactions. Margaret sat back in the chair, allowing a deep, measured exhale, letting the warmth of the evening and the quiet of the study reinforce her sense of focus, patience, and deliberate calm. Every movement, every observation, every careful breath was a practice in asserting dignity and control, a reinforcement of the understanding that influence often resides in restraint and clarity, and that her quiet vigilance would shape the unfolding dynamics with deliberate precision. As the light outside faded to the soft glow of twilight, Margaret remained poised and attentive, fully aware of the subtle power of observation, reflection, and measured response, ready to navigate the next encounters with thoughtful consideration and quiet strength. Margaret remained in her study, the soft light of the evening casting long shadows across the walls and floor, the muted colors of the room deepening in the dimming glow. She adjusted the cushions. On the chair, smoothing the fabric with precise motions that reflected both habit and intentionality, grounding herself in the familiar rhythm of her space. Her eyes roamed the room, settling on the framed photographs of family gatherings, holiday dinners, and past celebrations, each image a quiet reminder of time, effort, and care invested, and each now tinged with the awareness of subtle disregard she had felt throughout the day. She poured another cup of tea, the warmth seeping into her hands, and she allowed the steam to rise slowly, filling her senses with a calm focus that contrasted sharply with the tension she had observed outside. Margaret traced the edges of her notebook, the paper smooth beneath her fingertips, and began to reflect on the unfolding dynamics, the small gestures and glances, the inflections of voice and body language that had carried layers of meaning, all cataloged meticulously in her mind. She considered the patterns she had noticed in Ethan over recent weeks, the casual remarks that bordered on dismissive, the half-smiles that masked impatience, the timing of jokes that seemed to undermine rather than entertain. Each had contributed to the quiet erosion of respect, the subtle shaping of a landscape in which her presence was minimized, and yet Margaret understood that awareness was power, and that observation alone held a strength that did not require immediate reaction. The faint sounds of the neighborhood drifted through the open window, the distant hum of a passing car, the soft laughter of children playing further down the street, the whisper of leaves moving with the evening breeze, all providing a quiet accompaniment to her contemplation. Margaret shifted her posture, straightening her back and aligning her shoulders, feeling the calm authority in her own body, the silent declaration of patience and readiness, a poised vigilance that required no words to assert itself. She reflected on the rituals she had maintained over the years, the careful planning of meals, the attention to detail in creating welcoming spaces, the consistency of her presence as a guiding and nurturing force within the household, all of which had formed the backdrop against which subtle tensions and imbalances now stood out more clearly. Margaret allowed herself a small, controlled smile, not of satisfaction in the discomfort of others, but of recognition of her own clarity, her capacity to navigate the unfolding events with deliberation, precision, and measured intent. She reviewed the notes she had taken mentally throughout the day, aligning observations, weighing implications, and considering potential courses of action that would allow her to respond without compromise to her composure, reinforcing the sense of agency she had cultivated over decades. The room, now softened by the waning light, seemed to reflect her inner state. Ordered, calm, attentive, a space in which awareness and patience were allies, and where every motion, every thought, every quiet decision contributed to a growing sense of preparedness and quiet strength. Margaret sipped her tea once more, the warmth grounding her, the taste familiar and reassuring, and she allowed herself to consider the evening ahead, the conversations yet to be had, and the opportunities to assert presence, dignity, and calm authority in subtle, deliberate ways. She straightened the chair back to its proper position, arranged the notebook and pen with careful alignment, and leaned back slightly, feeling the rhythm of her breath, the quietude of the space, and the clarity of mind that came from measured observation, patient reflection, and the recognition that true influence often resided in the combination of calm restraint and precise awareness. The shadows deepened, the light softened, and Margaret remained seated, poised and observant, fully attuned to the nuances of the household dynamics, ready to carry forward the lessons of the day with a careful balance of patience, insight, and quiet authority that would guide her through the interactions yet to come. Margaret rose from the desk chair, placing the empty cup of tea carefully on the side table, her fingers lingering on the handle as if drawing strength from the simple act of setting it down. She moved toward the window, lifting the blinds slightly to peer at the backyard, now quiet under the deepening twilight, the shadows of the trees stretching long across the lawn, and the last rays of sunlight glinting off the patio furniture. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of the nearby pine trees and the subtle aroma of dinner lingering from earlier in the day. Margaret allowed herself a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the calm settle over her as she reflected on the rhythm of the afternoon, the way each motion, glance, and word had carried weight, even when subtle, shaping the dynamics she now understood more clearly. Her eyes drifted to the edge of the patio where Ethan had stood, recalling the small gestures, the casual tilts of the head, the smirk that had accompanied his actions, each one recorded in her memory with precise clarity, each one contributing to a pattern she could now read with ease. Margaret considered the past weeks, the accumulation of minor slights, the jokes that carried an edge, the subtle dismissals, and the quiet moments of avoidance, and she cataloged them all, letting each insight settle into a growing framework of awareness and understanding. She stepped back from the window, the wooden floor cool beneath her feet, and allowed her gaze to move around the living room, noting the alignment of furniture, the positions of scattered magazines, the subtle signs of activity, each detail a reflection of the environment she had cultivated and the care with which she had tended it. Margaret ran a hand along the back of the sofa, the fabric smooth beneath her fingertips, grounding herself in tactile reality, reminding herself of the order and composure she maintained, even when others disregarded it. She moved slowly, deliberately, arranging a cushion, straightening a throw, adjusting a photo frame. The motion small but purposeful, each a statement of presence and awareness, an assertion of control without confrontation. The quiet settled over her, broken only by the distant hum of traffic, the faint chirp of crickets, and the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze, each sound reinforcing the contrast between the calm inside and the subtle tension she had experienced earlier. Margaret paused, considering the ways in which her response, or deliberate restraint, had already begun to influence the energy of the household, noting the micro-adjustments in posture, the fleeting expressions, the slight hesitations, all of which indicated the awareness she had cultivated through observation. She returned to the desk to gather her notes, aligning them neatly, the paper smooth and orderly beneath her fingers, and she allowed herself to review the mental map she had constructed, every gesture, every tone, every nuance of interaction cataloged and understood, a network of insight that she could act upon with precision when appropriate. The evening deepened, the light fading to a soft indigo, and Margaret felt a sense of steady determination settle over her, a quiet confidence that came from awareness, patience, and the deliberate choice to observe before acting. She straightened in her chair, shoulders back, head held high, and allowed herself a measured exhale, feeling the calm and clarity of mind that had been her ally throughout the afternoon. Every thought, every movement, every breath reinforced her sense of readiness, a poised vigilance that allowed her to navigate the evolving dynamics with discretion, strength, and quiet authority, fully aware of the subtle power inherent in patience, reflection, and observation as the household settled into the quiet rhythm of early evening. The soft glow of the last light outside casting gentle shadows that mirrored the deliberate calm within. Margaret stood at the window for a moment longer, letting the fading light of evening wash over the backyard and the quiet traces of the day, the empty chairs, the scattered napkins, the faint scent of grilled food still lingering in the air. She allowed herself a slow, deliberate inhale, feeling the cool breeze drift in and stir the curtains gently, reminding her of the rhythm of life outside and the continuity that persisted even when small affronts disrupted the expected flow. Turning away from the window, she moved toward the bookshelf, her fingers brushing over the spines of well-worn volumes, each one a repository of knowledge, comfort, and memory, a tangible reflection of the time and care she had invested in herself and in cultivating spaces of order and reflection. She paused, her gaze settling on a particular photograph of Ethan as a child, his smile wide and genuine, the innocence of earlier years standing in contrast to the calculated levity he had displayed during the barbecue. Margaret allowed the memory to pass gently, acknowledging the shift in their dynamic without letting it dominate her awareness, letting it inform her understanding rather than provoke an impulsive response. She walked slowly to the center of the room, taking in the alignment of furniture, the quiet hum of the ceiling fan above, the way the shadows stretched across the floor, and she allowed herself a sense of presence, grounding in the deliberate order she had maintained. Reaching for a notebook, she made a small notation of observations, not in haste, but with measured intention, cataloging subtle gestures, tones, and moments that spoke to the evolving behavior she had witnessed, each note a tool for reflection, a way to prepare for thoughtful engagement in the future. Margaret returned to her seat by the window, letting the light catch the soft gray of her hair and the steady calm in her posture, sensing the quiet power that resided in stillness, in deliberate awareness, in the decision to observe carefully before acting. Outside, the evening deepened, the sky tinged with soft pinks and purples, the distant sounds of neighborhood life blending with the gentle rustle of leaves, and Margaret felt a subtle reassurance in the constancy of the world beyond the house, a rhythm that would continue regardless of the small disruptions of a single afternoon. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of patience, the clarity of thought, the quiet authority that had been cultivated over decades of experience, and she allowed herself to plan, not in reaction but in strategy, noting opportunities to assert presence and dignity in ways that would carry more influence than any immediate confrontation could achieve. Margaret opened her eyes, scanning the room with steady awareness, noting the subtle cues of her environment, the arrangement of furniture, the placement of objects, the small signs of life that had occurred and would continue, each a reminder of the balance between calm observation and the readiness to act with precision when appropriate. She stood, moving with deliberate care toward the desk to set the notebook aside, aligning the pen neatly beside it, the act simple yet purposeful, a reaffirmation of her composure and control. Margaret took one last look around the room, the air filled with the quiet of the settling evening, her mind cataloging the dynamics of the household, the patterns of behavior she had observed, and the subtle measures she could take to maintain respect, awareness, and authority. As the twilight deepened, she remained poised, a figure of calm deliberation and quiet strength, her movements, her breath, her posture all reflecting the deliberate attention and patience that would guide her through the interactions yet to come, ensuring that her presence remained acknowledged, her dignity intact, and her influence carefully and strategically exercised. Margaret returned to the living room, her movements calm and deliberate, noting the softened glow of the evening light streaming through the blinds, casting a warm hue over the furniture and floor. She took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the day settle around her, and she allowed her mind to trace the events of the afternoon, each gesture, glance, and tone catalogued with precision and clarity. The quiet of the house offered her a space to reflect, to observe the subtle dynamics that had unfolded, and to recognize the patterns that indicated not merely a single incident, but a series of deliberate, calculated behaviors. She moved toward the sofa, sitting with her back straight, hands resting lightly on her lap, and she allowed herself to imagine the subtle shifts that could be made, the ways in which presence, patience, and measured responses could influence the energy and interactions of those around her. Margaret recalled past moments, holidays, family dinners, and casual Sunday afternoons, noting the small changes over time, the tiny dismissals, the jokes with hidden edges, the way conversations had shifted subtly, each piece a signal that she now read with practiced awareness. She allowed her eyes to sweep the room, noting the placement of objects, the slight misalignment of chairs, the untouched glasses on the table, and she recognized in these ordinary details a deeper understanding of the household's flow and the roles that each person had assumed, knowingly or unknowingly. Margaret took a sip of water from the glass she had placed on the side table, the cool liquid offering a moment of grounding as she considered the strategies she might employ, the ways in which observation could be transformed into quiet influence, the subtle yet powerful assertion of dignity and composure in the face of disregard. Outside, the evening had deepened further, shadows stretching across the yard, the faint sounds of distant traffic and neighborhood life blending with the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze, a serene backdrop that contrasted with the careful attention Margaret was applying to her reflections. She considered Ethan, his behaviors, his mannerisms, the ways in which he had tested boundaries, and she cataloged these in her mind, not with resentment, but with a clear-headed understanding of the environment and the subtle interplay of respect, attention, and influence. Margaret adjusted the cushions on the sofa, aligning them with exactitude, a small act of control that mirrored the discipline and clarity she maintained internally, and she let the repetition of small, precise actions reinforce her sense of agency and focus. She observed the photographs on the wall, noting the continuity of life, the passage of time, the ways in which relationships had evolved, and she allowed a quiet acknowledgement of both the joy and the challenges that those years had brought, seeing them as a context for understanding and responding with poise. Margaret traced the edge of the coffee table with her fingers, feeling the smooth surface, and she reflected on the power of restraint, the effectiveness of patient observation, and the value of responding at the right moment with intention and clarity. She inhaled slowly, letting the breath center her thoughts, and she envisioned the coming days, the interactions yet to take place, and the opportunities to assert calm authority and thoughtful presence, ensuring that her influence remained acknowledged, her dignity maintained, and her composure unwavering. The evening light continued to fade, the room deepening into soft shadow, and Margaret sat poised and attentive, fully aware of the strength and quiet power that resided in measured action, patience, and the careful orchestration of presence, prepared to navigate the household with precision, awareness, and unshakable calm.